We'll wait a couple minutes.
Councilmember Rattenberg, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Great. All right.
Excellent. We were just doing roll call. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Melanie. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, which is the approval of minutes. I will take a motion to approve the minutes made by Councilmember Flasher, seconded by Councilmember Clark. Any questions, comments, or anything about the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any nays or abstains? Seeing none, all righty. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, which is public input. I don't see any attendees, so there shouldn't be any, and there's nobody in the audience, so we can just kind of cruise right past that part, which takes us to the first item under action items for planning matters, which we have 4 of them, which is the sound analysis for State Route 100. If I was sent a cheat sheet earlier today, I haven't had a chance to look at my emails, so I'm gonna just kind of look at you guys and
We'll do our best to assist, Mr. Chair.
thank you. Yeah, kind of give me a nod, but Joe, it looks like you have this one, so go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you'll recall, at our October committee meeting, the final draft of the sound analysis for the 2 major state highway corridors was presented by Dr. Thunder. As part of that analysis, Dr. Thunder provided 7 recommendations relative to how to offset noise along those major corridors and any other roadway corridors in the future. Tonight, the department prepared a memorandum relating to those recommendations, and you'll see that there are only 6 of those identified. The 7th recommendation that Dr. Thunder had provided to the committee for consideration related to the proliferation or growth in use of electric vehicles. And from that perspective, certainly there are pluses and minuses. So Dr. Thunder agreed that that particular item probably should be removed from the list of 7, which is why you're seeing 6 tonight. Those 6 have varying levels of cost and what I would consider probability of success. The reason I say that is some of the locations, as you see in this particular image, are already constructed, and certainly we don't have the latitude of all the space that may be necessary for an appropriate berm, a acoustical fence, or the combination of the 2. So from that perspective, some aren't really applicable at this time, and others can certainly be applied with future development. And so tonight, that's what I would like to do in terms of just a presentation. And that would be to identify those I think that are more future orientated and those that we probably could start on as soon as next year if the committee concurs. The first is the use of thick vegetation to visually screen the roadway. This is more of a psychological tool, as Dr. Thunder had mentioned. Obviously, if there is enough tree mass, it does do an effective job of reducing the decibel level. But quite frankly, what we see in terms of buffer strips, even under our highest standards in our landscape manual, probably wouldn't achieve the level that we would hope for in terms of decibel reduction. So therefore, it's more of a psychological component. And I would note that we certainly are doing plantings, as you know, on Route 100. And primarily those are in the center of the median, but we could institute that elsewhere, as we've done and are proposing to do along villages at Brightleaf to add more trees there. The intent of that is more to screen the new housing from the roadway, or vice versa, but certainly there's an opportunity there. I would note, though, that with future projects, whether it be a subdivision or a subdivision with a planned residential development overlay district, we can require increased plantings along the corridors if that's the desire of the committee and ultimately city council. So I see number one as both a future application and one that could be considered right now if we should choose. In terms of the next item, the buffer zone of 300 to 500 feet, I truly believe that to be probably very impractical. Assume a typical 1 acre lot is about 200 by 200 feet. As you can see, we would eliminate a substantial area of the property from the development density formula. However, I say it's impractical, but if we were to consider it as a component of the required public space, there may be an opportunity here. Remember, we have a number of things that we ask the development to provide. There's stormwater management, which obviously is key to the development proceeding forward. There's right-of-way dedications for streets and sidewalks. And in Wildwood, we ask for public space. Typically, we don't treat buffer strips as credible public space, but if the committee should choose to investigate this, we could consider that. So instead of being another deduction from what could potentially be used for lots, whether they're 3 acre in size or down to what we see in town center in terms of 10,000 square feet, we could, for all intents and purposes, consider these buffer strips for sound mitigation as creditable public space. So that's an ordinance amendment, and ultimately, does the committee think that's reasonable to pursue? Without the ordinance amendment, I would go back to my original statement. I think it's highly unfeasible, and I see it as more of an imposition on the developer and the property owner than I would consider reasonable. Construct earthen berms is the third one. And certainly what I would say is this is a future application with a PRD. We can require that with a C8 district if there's components of the C8 district that include residential units. I see this as something we can apply in the future if the committee should support such. Acoustical fences, that's number 4. That's the most expensive option, but as you can see from the analysis provided by Dr. Thunder, it is the most effective. And the acoustical fence also requires the least amount of space, whereas the berm, even a 6-foot berm, we're looking at a 3-to-1 slope. We're talking about a substantial area of a site just to slope the 3-to-1 from the top of the berm. It means for every vertical foot, we need 3 feet. So it's 18 feet total. So we start adding up very quickly the amount of land space we need on a development or adjoining a right-of-way. The acoustical fence is just the opposite. It works very well in, let's say, more constricted spaces. It is obviously the most expensive. We can consider those now, And that was part of what we had discussed at our last meeting, just getting an understanding of how much an acoustical fence would cost before we would make any type of recommendation. Number 5 is to combine the berm and the acoustical fence where it's suitable. And that could be done through a PRD again, or as part of a subdivision plat. So there's an option there. And then finally, reduce the speed limit near sensitive areas. We've been told by Dr. Thunder, the faster the speeds of the vehicles, the more noise they generate. And we certainly have talked to the Missouri Department of Transportation over the years about the speeds on Route 109 and Route 100. We've not had great success in reducing them, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't keep trying. So to summarize, the department is seeking direction from the committee on which of these items it would like to have it start research first and then begin that process. I assume eventually we'll look at all 6 of these, but for the immediate needs of both the areas where we've done the analysis and elsewhere, the department would like to know where should we start based upon the committee's inclination, and then we'll get started on those. And from the perspective of the department, I believe we'll be bringing these back to you maybe as soon as December, but certainly through the first few meetings of the new year. So tonight we're seeking your input on these items, and if any of them are off the table, certainly that would be beneficial. But again, we're just trying to figure out where we'd like to start. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Scott, go ahead, please.
Yeah, just a question, I guess, for Joe. Are we receiving concerns from the residents right now regarding the noise levels along 100 and 109? Or are we engaging in this more from a proactive standpoint? Just trying to get a better feel for, this whole project.
Councilmember Ottenberg, I would say it's both.
Okay.
During the spring, summer, and fall, when people are more outdoors, there's more activity. What we saw is a significant increase in concerns relating to noise from the areas of Kingstown Estates, Hickory Manor Estates, the villages at Brightleaf, and almost always every year from the Evergreen subdivision, a portion of that. Also this year, we heard from the south side of Route 100, the Canberry development. Now, as we move into winter, when the windows are closed, the heaters, the furnaces are on, we seem to have less of that. So I think there is a desire to investigate the problems we have, but I would also say I think we should be proactive. If we can tweak how we do our public space, I think there's an opportunity there to not only create that sound mitigation buffer, Councilmember Ottenberg, but also maybe preserve those frontages along our streets with existing woodlands and trees, and we all benefit from that then.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, Scott. I got Mike and then Deborah and Teresa.
Thank you. So I was reading this and I know, based on the different methods of acceptable criterion for the decibel levels, I think it seemed like Dr. Thunder worked with the EPA, which was the lowest, the 55, and then the adjusted DNL, which was up to 60, but the FHWA was 67 and HUD was 65. And so we don't have a single one of these areas notated here that even comes close to 65. And I did see that on the HUD, it said that typically pertains primarily to multifamily units that don't have outdoor living space, which I'm not an expert on how they calculate their sound, but I would advocate that HUD insures a lot more properties that are single family than they do that are multifamily. So I don't know why they would base their sound studies just on multifamily. That doesn't make sense to me. But so I looking at that from 67 down to 55 on the low end, I think us using the 55 to 60 threshold is a very aggressive approach to saying what's acceptable or not. And even using that highly aggressive range, we still have almost negligible differences of above 60. And reading the mitigation opportunities, it stated that decreasing the decibel level by 3 decibels would be barely noticeable.
Right.
So even if we brought, there's only 5 on here that are a hair over 60, which is, like I said, well below the FHWA and the HUD acceptable levels. Even if we brought those down to 60, it would be barely noticeable to even noticeable. So, that's my first point, is that I don't feel like we have a major issue that's some kind of a standout thing that's a major problem. The other thing is, in the areas where the sound seems to be the loudest, I guess, during those peak hours, we're talking about, homes that are sitting right on 100. And I guess, once again, I understand somebody, wanting not to have sound, but I guess my question would be, you built a house backing up to a major thoroughfare. It's not like this road was put in there after the subdivision was there. There's something to be said about that choice that was made to do that. And then I guess what I'm getting to is, I don't feel like the city should spend any money mitigating this issue, just because it's not something that was presented or created after the fact of these homes being built. And even with all the most aggressive numbers being used, which I'm not entirely, on the same page with, we're still, fractionally, negligibly, almost from a statistical standpoint, over that minimal threshold as far as what's there. So and as far as imposing additional restrictions on developers, going back to the fact that I feel like we are about as intrusive and aggressive on requirements for developers as it is, and then I would think the only thing that would make the possible sense is to put some vegetation, or I don't disagree with you in the sense that on future developments, if there is wooded area or vegetation between the road and where the development is, maybe we say there has to be left a certain amount to where that's already there. We're going to keep it there. We're not forcing somebody to put something new there. Yeah, I could be on board with supporting that. I just, as far as investing, we're constantly talking about budgetary issues and not being able to come up with money for much more important things that are actual issues the city needs to address. I don't think, we've already invested a significant amount of money on these studies and everything. I don't know. That's just my opinion after looking at everything.
Mr. Chair, if I may, that's exactly what the department wanted to hear, the opinions of the committee. And from the perspective of the department, certainly I think there are tools that we can use to mitigate problems in the future. You've mentioned just adding the landscaping as a component along the roadways. And I really feel strongly in the instance of using that buffer component as a credible public space item. We did it when the MSD went to the phase 2 clean water regulations, because what we were seeing is all the basins got substantially larger in size. And by the time we factored in public space, it was like, my gosh, there's hardly any of the reusable ground left, so to speak. And so I see that as an opportunity as well, that we can help the development community, and at the end of the day, create maybe more wooded corridors along the edges, as well as mitigate sound. So thank you.
Thank you. Deborah, go ahead, please. Tracy, you'll be next.
I definitely have a different opinion than Councilmember Kiliani. For the villages of Brightleaf, there were supposed to be berms, and when that was discussed while we were discussing the ordinance, somehow those got lost in the process. They also took down a substantial number of trees, and especially along the highway that they weren't supposed to take down, which then increased the sound. But to me, I mean, there has always been an issue at the back of Evergreen. There's always been an issue along Kingston. When they put the roundabouts in, it's substantially increased. And while it may seem on paper like, not very significant, when you live there and you live there day in and day out, and it's a continuous emission of, of sound, that's a different story. It does, it does cause an issue. And it's, Canberry, you didn't hear much from them anyway. I didn't until we put the roundabout up. And then, there's a lot of now people complaining because the sound is increased substantially. I think aesthetically and for Wildwood, where we're supposed to be preserving nature, I definitely don't think, the trees and vegetation should be removed along the highways when we do a development going forward, for a lot of reasons. And then, it seems to me that wherever there's been a roundabout put, it's increased. The noise level is increased. Now we're getting ready to put in a few more roundabouts. So I think this is something definitely we should think about before we put the roundabouts in. How can we mitigate that sound ahead of time? Make sure that there's enough space there to mitigate the sound. And yes, there's more traffic now, but I can tell you that when they built the houses down 109, originally there was a lot of vegetation and woods and so forth. So you didn't get a lot of sound. Unfortunately, the city keeps growing and we keep getting more cars. And so the sound level is going up. And it may not sound like much unless you're living there and it's constant emission. We've had a lot of complaints, Ward 8, especially Ward 5, Ward 4, Ward 1 across from Ward 5. It's not just, one ward, it's multiple wards. And unfortunately, that grouping is all pretty much close together, which I think even has more of an impact on it when you add them all up together. And we do have to decide how are we going to use the funds, how are we going to use the taxpayers' money. But when you have a substantial amount of residents who have been complaining about the noise, sound, and the removal of trees and vegetation for many, many years, I think that's something that we really should take into consideration to mitigate. How much funds are we going to have? I don't know. We might be able to get a grant for it. I don't know that either. Going forward, the developers certainly should contribute. But I do think whether we do piecemeal or however we do it, it's something that we need to mitigate for our residents.
Thank you, Joe. Any response to?
Well, just again, if in the end the committee says of the 6, there really isn't a desire, I still think we should lobby the Missouri Department of Transportation for reduced speeds. I mean, if the speed limit is set at 55 on Route 100, it's not 55. And so even if we can inch it down some, we get the benefit of maybe less noise, but also increased safety. So there are a few things, at least one thing I see there that's something worth trying. We probably won't be as successful as we've been in the past, but certainly I wouldn't take it off the table. And now we have a study from an acoustical engineer that says there is a benefit. So.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I guess I agree a little bit with everyone and disagree a little bit with everyone, but going down the list, the thick vegetation, it is a lot of psychological, but it can have some benefit. So, having that, putting that back does cause a little bit of benefit. But of course you have to have trees with a certain shape of leaves and that keep leaves throughout the year, or evergreens or something. And you have to make sure that the center of the tree stand is thick, not just the tops of the trees, because the sound's going to go wherever it finds a tunnel. And that's another thing you have to watch out for with all of these, not to make us a sound tunnel, because that sound will tunnel through and be louder to hear. It'll be more of a noise when it gets to the other side. So when I look at this, I think that the thick vegetation is a possibility to help it, and it will look very natural. but then the acoustical fence and the combination of the berm and the acoustical fence, I would have to agree with Dr. Thunder that that would be in our area, probably one of the better ones to look at, because we could make a shorter berm with a short fence to come up with the same height, to be at a eye level height, so that the sound hits it and either bounces off or is absorbed, whatever material it's made out of. Everyone is different and they hear things differently. So noise to one person is not necessarily noise to another person. Noise is just an annoying sound. And you have to factor in not only the decibel level, but also the frequency, because the frequency is what's going to be that shrill sound of on high speeds. The tires make that high noise sound. That's what you're going to have, is it may be a lower decibel level than a really big motor, but it depends on what you consider to be noise. And our residents over in this area and then across the 109, they have also complained to me about noise. And they did have houses there before we got so much traffic. So I would say that probably the traffic is causing a lot of that noise. So my suggestion would be, just like Joe said, keep pushing for reduction of speed, and where we could get an ordinance amendment to do the suggestion he made with the buffer zones and the tweaking the public space. You said that so much more elegantly than I did, but I think that would be a start. And then look at maybe acoustical fences for later, because you said last time that they do make very nice looking acoustical fences.
Thank you, Teresa. Scott, I see you got your hand back up, or? did you-
Yeah, just a
Okay.
question. Joe mentioned possibility of lowering the speed limit on 100, and I guess I was just curious. I guess that's a possibility, but would we need to ask or request a formal lowering of the speed limit on 100, or would it be possible that traffic enforcement could increase their efforts to enforce the existing speed limits?
Well, very astute observation, sir. But yes, our police could be out there and at least start the process of lowering the speed limit, because from my perspective, no one drives 55 out there, particularly once they get past the last set of lights. So
Right.
certainly that's an opportunity that we could explore almost immediately. And then, as you've mentioned, we've lobbied the Missouri Department of Transportation in the past. They see that Route 100 corridor as a inter-county connection. So they're trying to move as much traffic as fast as they can through that corridor onto Franklin County and beyond, and then obviously to the east. So I see both as options, and thank you for identifying the first.
Well, maybe it's something that we could do without having to wait on the state.
Thank you, Scott. So I don't see any other hands, but Joe, I got a couple questions for you. Well, first of all, I guess in City Administrator Cross's weekly email, or no, maybe it's coming from the lobbyist, but I think there's a meeting set up between Steve and the mayor and MoDOT in the next week or two about the safety on Highway 100 and the term, correct? Well, isn't there something coming up? Maybe we can bring this part up also, just while we have an audience, that we can just mention the speed, and maybe in the meantime, our police department can give some sort of if there's an incident report along there, but while we have them in front of us, maybe we can kind of get their attention on that. So a couple other things. I mean, obviously the fence is, yeah. I mean, that's the most effective, but I mean, is like, do we have an idea of like, I mean, those panels, they look huge. I mean, they've got to be probably at least 10 to 12 feet wide, if not more. I mean, is they sell them by the panel? Like, do we have any idea? Because there's also, so when my parents lived in South County and they were putting that fence up along 270, which probably was very effective, there was a lot of resistance from the neighbors because it kind of gave, they thought it was going to negatively affect their property value because now I'm selling my house and there's a sound barrier right there in my backyard, so to speak. So I'm not saying that our residents wouldn't necessarily want that, but I'm just saying it's not all positive with a fence, but do we have any idea how much those are?
Mr. Brown, our Director of Public Works, does have an idea, and I'll get that information for you. Because when we did the expansion of Route 109, Ms. McCutcheon and others had asked that, do we need some sound mitigation in those areas? They used a higher standard. The analysis indicated that the sound barriers or the acoustical fence was not needed. But we know from that discussion, at least the cost at that time. So I'll get that information for you, and we'll let you, at least let you know what the numbers might be.
Okay, so the next thing I have, because if I remember right, and this might have been Dr. Thunder, this was a couple years ago, we were actually talking about like a vegetation buffer. Didn't he say for that to actually be effective, it had to be a couple 100 feet? I thought for some reason that's sticking in my head.
It is at a substantial area. I don't remember the exact number of feet, but
You know, well, and it just kind of saying like in existing situations, that's probably not very realistic. And even in future developments, I don't know if that would be necessarily realistic, but you know, you had made a comment earlier and Teresa just alluded to it also that maybe we do, I don't know, you know, whether we change the ordinance or like, you know, I'm kind of thinking of, you know, we're looking at a new development right now off of 109, you know, can we work with making sure there is this sound buffer? I don't know if we need an ordinance for that or if that's just done in a site development plan but just like, I think everybody kind of agrees moving forward, we need to make sure that we're doing as much as possible without killing the development, so to speak.
Well, in regards to the reserve, as you know, one of the principal access points, which is the extension of Main Street, is along Route 109. To accommodate that grade there, because Bonham Creek sits right at the base of Route 109, so to speak. There's a substantial amount of cost to that access point, and then there's obviously an equal, if not greater, amount of disturbance. At the last meeting with Stock and Associates and the attorney representing the petitioner, formerly Payne Family Homes, there was a discussion about potentially not accessing the development at that point. They have frontage on Old Manchester Road, and then there's a stub street that comes out through by Phillips 66. So there actually is some thought of that already, that if we avoided that connection, we could preserve almost that entire frontage. And that would be a substantial win, I think, in some regards, maybe not all, but in some.
Okay, and my final question, and I mean, I might have figured this out myself, but I believe everybody that's the one that are saying that there's more noise around the roundabouts, but I mean, it's such a low speed. I mean, I believe them. I don't think they're making it up, but what is the science behind that? Is it just because cars are moving and not stopped at a light? Because
Please go ahead. You're more of an expert on this than I. So thank you.
It's the direction. It's a vector quantity. So it's direction and speed. So as you're going around the corner, the increase in the sound it's going to increase the sound as you go around the corner.
okay, I believe that. I don't know otherwise not to. So that's all I had. Thank you. And Deborah.
Yeah. So something you just said, Don, kind of, you know, hit a light bulb. So can you show us a picture of an acoustical fence? Because when you brought up the wall, I know 100% nobody around those areas want a wall. that are like that you see along the highway. So is it one and the same or is it different?
They're actually, I think from the perspective of Dr. Thunder, I think he was talking more of what we're typically used to seeing. What I'd like to do is if you want us to investigate that, we can get some images and provide you a variety, and also then address Chair's question regarding cost. So we can do some research and at least answer the questions or have the information we need to say why we can't do it for these reasons or why we can for these reasons.
Now, I had a question. I read some things about green walls. Are there less expensive green walls that could be put there and do the same?
Well, the analogy I've used in the past is, and it's probably not the best one, but I'll give it to you anyway. For years, the police department had vests that they wore for protection. They were gigantic, they were heavy, and they were just difficult to wear. And many of the officers wouldn't wear them until it finally became mandatory. Now they use Kelvar, and it's light, it's flexible, and it works. I see the same kind of transition or trend in acoustical fences and walls. I think there is more materials now that can accommodate it without the bulk and still achieve the goal. And that's what I'd like to research for all of you.
So the additional research that you're offering, you don't need a motion for that part, I would think.
Now, you've given me a lot of food for thought. I know that we will want to get almost immediately to the mayor and Mr. Cross. Just maybe have them present this report and, just say, here's one of the recommendations. It's also about safety, not only reduction in noise, and then we'll look at some of the others that you've identified.
And then also you made reference like a change in the ordinance. Do we want to wait until you brought back this other information you think would be best?
Yeah, I'd like to answer all of your questions before I ask you to make some certain decisions or provide direction. I think that's only fair to you all.
Okay. Mike, go ahead, and then Deborah. So. You want to go?
That's fine.
Go
I was
ahead.
just gonna say a couple things. That Deborah mentioned that, on the Brightleaf side, they were told that there were gonna be firms, vegetation or whatever. I do think that there's a difference there. If the developer or whatever was the case at the time of the development, people were building over there, if they were promised or told that there was gonna be some type of mitigation that was going to be implemented, or that some of the vegetation that was already there was going to remain in place, and then it was subsequently taken away or removed and nothing, erected in its place. I definitely think that's a different situation. Because if I'm buying a house and I'm told, hey, we're going to have this thing that's going to block you from 109 or whatnot, and then I buy the house and then it's removed and there's nothing there, I'd be upset about that. I do think that that's not that correct versus the difference of, looking at a lot that's facing 109 or not 109, 100 and choosing to purchase it. And I guess that's the point I was trying to make. I wasn't trying to say that the folks aren't necessarily having an annoyance or something to that effect. But once again, just looking at the level, it's just, I think that's where I have the issue is when it comes to the city and what our responsibility is from taxpayer standpoint. Mitigate annoyances or things like, is it because, MoDOT uses the FHWA, which is 67, HUD uses 65. And we're even in the worst case scenario, we're not even close to either of those numbers by a long shot. And using the most aggressive, 55, 60, we're right in that exception, we're barely over. So that's my standpoint, is that I'm not saying it's not an annoyance. I'm not saying it's not a heightened sound during those peak hours that might be more than what you would love to hear if you were in a different part of the city where there's no traffic. But I guess where it becomes our responsibility to leverage taxpayer dollars to address those concerns is where I have a question. as far as what those costs and. And then that's separate though, than from some developer that had promised to do something that didn't follow through on that.
Joe, in the case of Brightleaf, was that like the berms are a part of the original discussion, but never made it to the final plan, or was that something that was actually
And
not done?
again, Ms. McCutcheon and I have agreed to disagree on components of the villages of Brightleaf, but several of the berms that were promised along Route 100 are there. They were constructed, they were on the improvement plans, and the work was completed. What led to more tree removal along Route 100 was when Pond Grover Loop Road was eliminated, and we ended up having to then extend Taylor Road all the way along the frontage of Route 100 to get the connection to Route 109. So we weren't anticipating that originally. So from the perspective of the department, we made the best decisions, or how about this? We made the best recommendations to city council to address secondary access or additional access when Pond Grover Loop Road was eliminated. And I'll be glad to show Ms. McCutcheon and any of you, the berms are there as promised. The reason I know it is because there was excess on the site and they used the excess on the grading plan to build the berms.
Thank you. Deborah, do you have another comment?
Yeah, Joe, didn't we actually get the speed limit reduced on 109 for just a small section?
I don't recall that, but certainly my memory isn't as good as it would be, and we'll find that out as well.
I think, didn't it go down to 45 and just that very sharp,
That long,
almost alongside of Lafayette?
I'll check
I
into
know there was a
that.
lot of back and forth with MoDOT. I thought we finally managed.
If we were successful, it was because of Mr. Thomas and Mr. Brown, and I'll find out and we'll let you know.
Thank you. Well, we've had some good discussion on that. And so let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the Watershed Erosion Task Force Detention Retention Basin Analysis. And Joe, I think you're doing this. Thank you.
So again, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I just kind of wanted to update you on the progress of the Watershed Erosion Task Force in this particular project, which is looking at potentially retrofitting some of the detention retention basins in the upper reaches of the Cox Creek watershed to actually address the source of the problem instead of fixing what the problem causes. And so what the Watershed Erosion Task Force recommended, and ultimately this committee and city council concurred, was to look at 6 locations. And then if those 6 locations were acceptable, ask the homeowners associations if our engineering team of Joe Wilson and Todd Wagner could get in and do a more detailed analysis. To date, of the 6, 4 have agreed, thanks to Mr. Farmer and West Glen Farms. We also have permission from Copper Lakes, Windcrest, and then the commercial basin that's located just to the rear of the theater, which we actually send our stormwater to. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The enclaves at Cherry Hills, I've not had any response from them as of date. And we are in a follow-up discussion with the harbors at Lake Chesterfield. That's being more led by Mayor Bolin and Steve Cross. But we're going to go ahead with the permission of the Watershed Erosion Task Force at a hopeful meeting at the end of this month, get them started on those 4 so we can see if this will really work or not. And so tonight it's just an update. I thought it was important enough to spend a few minutes on it. And there's no action required of the committee, but we're certainly, Melanie and I are glad to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for the department? None. Joe, you got anything you want to add or anything?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, the Birch Forest Drive turnaround. Mr. Vunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, this is a little different of a discussion than we've had over the past several months relating to gating the secondary emergency access or the access way. As you know, the project was delayed due to some permitting snafus that occurred between MSD, the city of Wildwood, and our contractor, those permitting snafus led to a significant delay. And in discussing with the general contractor, those delays have added additional cost. And so tonight, the department is identifying those additional costs associated with the project. The change order was requested from the general contractor by our Department of Public Works. It gives them in very specific detail. I summarized it as best I could as part of the memorandum, combining the remobilization, the concrete cost increase, the engineering associated with the head wall, which was required by the MSD permitting process, and then a desire to improve the pedestrian access and driveway approaches associated with the residential lots at the end of Birch Forest Drive. In total is over $10,000. As was discussed, there is money available in our capital improvements program in the department's portion. And tonight, the department is respectfully requesting authorization to proceed forward with an amendment to the contract to be presented to City Council. Also in the memorandum, I do note that Councilmember Farmer's suggestion of installing cameras in the vicinity of the emergency access once complete, and to determine the extent of problem. That is something the department is working on with our police. And hopefully, once the construction is complete, which is expected before the end of the year, we'll be able to give you some hard data, either in support of the gate or not. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. And like with the change order, since like we're at fault, so to speak, we don't have a whole lot of choice on this.
Again, there is a quirk in how our contracts are written for projects of this nature, infrastructure projects. There's usually a bit of a flexibility in them. The Department of Public Works actually thought they had up to $90,000 as part of the $80,000 bid. And what I explained to him is, no, I only put in $100,000 in the capital improvements. And we do want to do the landscaping. We promised to both parties, those in Brightleaf and those in the Evergreen subdivision. And as you know, last night we approved a contract for that $20,000 of landscaping that we anticipated from day one. And the landscaping, as you know, is going to be a little more robust, so we can see if we can camouflage the emergency access and see if we can address the problem that we've seen in the past.
Okay, so you're looking for a motion to approve the change order, basically.
Yes.
Okay, does anybody want to make that motion?
Yes, I'll make a motion to go ahead and proceed with the additional funds. And I think I have the department. What?
Yeah, a little over 10,000, it looks like.
To go ahead and complete the Birch Forest.
Okay, so motion made by Councilmember McCutcheon. Do we have a second? Seconded by Councilmember Farmer. Any other discussion? Teresa, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I'm not reading this right. So the original contract amount was for 78,000 something.
Correct.
And then our budget was for the 10% contingency or something of 100,000.
The way that
And then this is above that, or this is included in that contingent?
that's the appropriate term. The way the Department of Public Works authors its contracts is they do put in a contingency amount. In this case, up to $90,000 based upon unknown circumstances or problems or cost increases, et cetera. However, what was presented to this committee and to City Council was a budget based upon the bid amount of $78,000, and then bidding out the landscaping, which our landscape architect estimated at about $20,000 to $22,000. So the budget that was presented and is in the capital improvements program is only $100,000. And so from that perspective, I appreciate the Public Works using that contingency component in their contracts, but we were trying to do this as close to cost as possible. That's why I'm here tonight. We do have funding because there are projects in capital improvements for 2022 we didn't complete. We didn't start and we won't complete. Let me put it that way. So again, the Department of Planning and Parks doesn't write the contracts that way. We base it on bid. Plus, if we're going out for additional outside support, we anticipate that. But as I say, there's just a misunderstanding between the two departments, and I'm trying to correct that tonight. And I take responsibility for it.
Okay, I guess I was just confused because it says the total contract amount was 90,000. So this amount is on top of that, or the 10,000 you're talking about is the same as the 10,000 on here, or is that different amount?
What ultimately will happen is that we'll do the original bid of 78 plus the change order plus the landscaping. So yes, the contingency, I'm asking you to support the contingency that was part of the contract. Thank you. Probably a better way of explaining it. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? So we just do a voice vote on this. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank
All
you.
right, great. Thank you, Joe. Next item on the agenda is recent development trends within the city of Wildwood. This is typically just an FYI for everybody, but the department will take any questions. I'm sure. Anybody got any questions on this part? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to park matters. First item is the Hometown Heroes and Veterans Program, which I've already heard from a resident that they think this is awesome. So Melanie, go ahead.
There it is. Yes, we just wanted to give you an update on the program. We did end up getting it launched by Veterans Day. It was a tough push, but we made it. As you will see in front of you, the brochures that we had printed, I think they turned out lovely. We did take into account comments that were discussed, comments and suggestions that were discussed at the last meeting, and put those into the program. One being special recognitions. There were some that thought it was very important to keep the special recognitions on there. I reached out to the banner company, and they did say that they did have some issues with formatting when it came to, too many special recognitions, and recommended just offering the gold star, the silver star, and the purple heart. And so those are offered. If, somebody has the Medal of Honor, I'm sure we can work something out. Sponsorship. The department included a space on the application for sponsorship without a banner. Should anyone want to contribute to the program and doesn't necessarily, they just want to support our vets, but don't necessarily have a business or someone that they would like to put a banner up for. And then also there was the request of including the option of a banner without a photo. And so we are also offering that with the military seal in place of the photo. And so those were the updates from the last meeting as far as the actual program is concerned. I would also like to note the banners, the flag banners that are out through town center. I think that those turned out very well, and those will be incorporated with this program and other holidays as well. So that's exciting. If you don't mind, I would like to just walk you through the website so you can see the new website.
Mr. Chair, I just would like to note that Ms. Ripito and Mr. Newberry did a lot on this website. I thought it'd be beneficial, and I hope you'd like to see it as it's now available. Thank you.
So as you can see, it's featured on the front page, which will then take you to this, which will actually take you to the page that has the banners on it. We did do a lot of work and wanted to showcase the banners, but it also gives more of an explanation and the details included on the brochure that you have in front of you, as well as the prices, the sponsorship opportunities, as well as contact information and such. And then when you hit apply here, it will take you into our our rec desk, and you can actually purchase the banner online so that we don't necessarily need a physical copy. You can upload the photograph online and pay for it online rather than having to come into City Hall. So we thought that was an important option. And so you can just go through Rec Desk and complete that in order to make your purchase. And yes, again, we also have already had one inquiry for sponsorship, one application in already. So it's exciting. And with that, that concludes the department's presentation. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them, myself or Mr. Vunich.
Thank you. And like I
Thank
said, I guess I should know this, but is this a Wildwood resident? Or is this just a generic? Okay,
Yeah, that came with the company that's
Okay.
sponsoring it. So that,
just more curious.
yeah.
So any questions or comments for the department? I had one question from a resident. Would we honor a military dog?
Honestly, we haven't even discussed a military dog, but we will, and we will get back to you with
Okay,
an answer on that
I'll
one.
let them know. Send a picture of your dog. Hey. So no action tonight needed, just letting us know. Thank you.
No,
It looks
just
great. The
providing an
website's awesome. So yeah, it's great work. It's really nice. I think it's
Excellent.
probably everything everybody was hoping it would be. Next item is the Pond Athletic Association, Mr. Vunich.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think Melanie and I would like to thank you all. Obviously, your direction on the Hometown Heroes banner program was essential to it being successful. And many of you I know spoke highly of it at City Council. So we do appreciate that. And we think it's going to be a good program for the city for many years to come. So thank you all.
I agree. Without interrupting, we'll thank Mr. Garitano for bringing it to our attention as well.
Yeah, very much so. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, in past years, the city of Wildwood has provided to the Pond Athletic Association support in the form of a single-time payment. In the early years, that payment was $10,000. Subsequently, as we started to understand the ramifications of some of our declining sales tax revenues, then COVID-19, that amount was reduced to $5,000. The committee has asked that the Pond Athletic Association use that primarily for Wildwood residents. And the best approach, based upon input from the Athletic Association, was the training league. Those youngsters that start out there at age 4 to 7. What the committee also requested before a recommendation would be forwarded to City Council to authorize the release of the $5,000 is an accounting. And generally speaking, that accounting identifies the revenues and expenditures of the association over the year, in this case, 2021 to 2022. And also just the numbers of residents, Wildwood residents, benefiting in the training league, benefiting from the allocation the city provides. So tonight, the department is identifying that information that has been provided by the Pond Athletic Association. It would note that in terms of just a simple review of the rosters for the training league, again, individuals 4 years of age to 7, at least 150 Wildwood residents benefited from the program that Pond Athletic Association offers. So tonight, the department is respectfully requesting a recommendation to move forward with the allocation that would be presented to City Council at its next meeting in December. If there are any questions or comments, the department would certainly be glad to try to answer them at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll make the motion to move this forward to council for approval.
Okay, seconded by Councilmember Kalani. Or do you have a question? Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, I definitely support that. My question was on here, it shows that for the 2021 and 22 season, overall expenses for the operation of the facility were 21,000 in the red. And so I guess my question is then what happened with that? Or, were we giving them more than 5,000 before COVID?
We used to provide a one-time payment of $10,000. And even at that amount, obviously, the the expenditures exceeding revenues in this particular situation would not have offset it substantially or at least addressed it totally. What I would say is I have an understanding, and there may be others on the committee that have a better understanding. There is a reserve fund that they use in those periods where revenues just don't Well, certainly, the discussion to reduce the allocation started here at the committee and then went to city council where it was endorsed. As part of that reduction, the committee was clear that we should do as much as we can to help the athletic association. So, as you know, they are a major provider of beer and wine and pretzel sales at our Celebrate Wildwood event. We allow them to keep all of those proceeds, which is substantial. I think it's over $10,000 generally each year for a single day event. We do provide them tables and tents for many of their events, particularly like their auction and et cetera. And they have their upcoming 60-year anniversary next year. And they've already asked if there's partnerships that the city would like to participate in, which when we identify those from the leadership at the association, we'll bring them to the committee to consider. So we are trying to do more outreach, not necessarily just from a financial standpoint.
Yeah, no, I guess I was trying to figure out, back off from 10 to 5 because of COVID, I mean, if they were leaving as much money. Using it as much, or did we go from 10 to 5 because we thought 10 was too much in general? To allocate 5. That was my opinion, but strictly because of COVID, should we do that?
I think it was prior to COVID, the discussion occurred is my recollection, Mr. Galani.
Yeah,
Thank
if I remember right, there was even resistance on council from some parts to why we're supporting it at all.
Yeah.
And I think the compromise was, let's give them half, if I remember right. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I volunteer at EAA, as some of you know. And I mean, if anything, COVID made it where the ballparks needed money more than they would less, even though we weren't able to operate. That was part of the problem. You still had to maintain the fields and do all that stuff with no revenue coming in whatsoever. I can say that the trend in baseball is this like tournament feel where everyone's going and just doing tournaments. And so not necessarily locking into a ballpark. And to capture these kids at an early age and capture these teams at an early age is a huge benefit to the ballpark, which is why they ask for these funds, especially when they allocate it towards the training league. Because if you can lock them in early, then you have a better chance of maintaining them as time goes on, because so many people are looking for that competitive ball type of stuff now. So anyway, I'm in full support of this, obviously, but I don't want to like make recommendations to give more money to something that I kind of help with.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is the Community Parks Project, ADA improvements and safety enhancements. Mr. Bunich.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know, as part of this strategic planning process that City Council completed after a number of meetings, looking at accessibility issues and ensuring that all of our facilities are accessible as possible was a key component of one of the goals. As part of that, the department began an analysis of all of our park facilities. And one of the first things that came to our attention was Community Park and this speed hump and how it might function, how it functions and can function better from an accessibility standpoint, as well as safety. To accommodate what we believe is necessary to meet accessibility requirements, the department would like to install 6 warning strips as part of the speed hump that provides access between the pavilion playground area to the dog park. There is a plan sheet that shows you the locations of the proposed warning strips, as well as the details for them as well. Along with that, we would stripe 2 additional crossing, and they're shown as the white painted warning strips there as well. So from that perspective, we believe that it is an appropriate project for consideration by the committee and city council, and funds are available in our capital improvements programs for things of this nature. The second item relates to the original design of Community Park. In an effort to preserve as many of the large trees within the playground area, we created some tree wells. A couple of those tree wells have falls, so to speak, that exceed the standard, which is typically anywhere from 32 to 36 inches. This was brought to the attention by a parent of a child that attends the park. There was not a problem. They just noticed it and thought, have you looked at it? And we are now looking at it. And so we've come up with a solution. We wanted to do something that was in keeping with the character of the playground area, which is primarily trees and wooden type equipment, but also something that would provide protection. So Ken Keitel of TerraSpec provided the schematic that's before you that would be utilized. It's a split rail fence of dark nature, and behind it would be some type of fencing so kids couldn't crawl through it and still access the area. Those areas are for play, and so there is stone steps that lead down to a couple of them. And so from that perspective, we would not cover those or restrict access to those steps, but again, to the areas where we have concerns about the fall zone. Glenn Gailey also, I had asked Glenn Gailey to take a look at it, and there is another approach that we are considering, but tonight I wanted to introduce this and get some feedback. And if in the end, if this is the best approach based upon our conversation with Mr. Gailey and the park designer, then obviously we would proceed forward with this. So tonight I'm presenting to you the ADA improvements along with this particular option, and I'm seeking approval of the ADA improvements so that they can be presented to City Council at their next meeting, and hopefully implemented in a short period of time, which we believe we can. And then from the perspective of the fall zones, the department notes that this will change the character of the playground area. It is a fairly substantial structure, so to speak. But I think, again, we need to address the fall zones from a safety factor, and would like your support of this approach as well. If there's something of a lesser nature that comes out of the discussions with Mr. Gailey, we'll bring it back to committee in December. But if not, I'd like to proceed as quickly as possible. Thank you.
So Joe, are you looking for 2 separate motions you think would be more appropriate, or we could tie this up in one?
Yes, I would like a first motion to endorse the ADA improvements as proposed at the speed hump. And then I would like a endorsement of the rail fence if the discussions with Mr. Gailey don't turn out to be fruitful.
Okay, so does somebody want to make a motion on the ADA part made by Councilmember Clark, seconded by Councilmember McCutcheon? Any questions? Are you okay if we like vote on that part now and take it? Okay. Any questions for the department? That, and this one's funded. This is, we have the money in the budget. Okay. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. And then looking for an endorsement to look into the tree wells,
Yes,
so to speak. Okay. And then you'll just bring that back to the committee. with
yes.
Your findings.
I just, again, just from the perspective of even Ken Keitel, who did the design, he says it's really going to alter the character of the park. I appreciate that. There's a safety concern. If there is another way to do it, I'd like to at least have that before you as
Yeah.
well. But I wanted to introduce the concept and the issue to you so that I could get feedback from the committee, so that when we do make a recommendation, we have all the information we need.
Okay, so are you making the motion to or like endorsing the exploration? You got a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, just looking at that fence and having been a mother for 40 some years. That fence looks like something to climb on to me, and it looks like it might be more dangerous because a higher fall than just what's there. Yeah. So there.
That's not the
I-
goal, trust me.
I would probably look at some of the other options.
Okay, thank you.
I see my son jumping.
Well, we know it's a problem. We're going to address it. We just want to find the right answer.
Yeah, I like them being proactive about it. Go ahead, Mike.
So I was reading in the memo that there was, one of the options was to fill in with additional mulch, bring that floor of the well up to versus putting a structure in there.
And it's kind of convoluted, so bear with me. I'll yeah,
Instead of
exactly. But in two of the tree well areas, we also have an area inlet for stormwater purposes. The stormwater management plan wasn't reviewed by MSD because it's outside their jurisdiction. They agreed to provide a sanitary sewer service, but not do stormwater. So what we're trying to determine, Mr. Galani, is if we were to remove the area inlets or raise the area inlets, are we really creating a problem in Bottom Creek, which the Watershed Erosion Task Force would throw me out of the building if I did. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant to endorse that concept right now. We need to do a little more engineering. But
yeah, no, I support it.
So we need a motion for the department to look into the options.
yes,
Okay, does anybody want to make that motion? Teresa, are you making that motion? Okay, and seconded by Councilmember Flasher. Any other questions or discussions? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Any abstentions?
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Vunich. Last two items, the in-personal virtual recreation programs and the facility reservations. These are once again typically FYI items that our department is open to any questions about. Anybody have anything regarding these? Seeing none. Okay, we don't have an executive session scheduled, so I have no anything under miscellaneous unless anybody else. Mr. Farmer.
Joe, how are we doing on the holiday tree lighting extravaganza?
I think we're doing very well. We began the process with the current president of the WBA, Jenny Gotsky. We met with her, I think it was August, and kind of just laid out the ground rules that we can't have a repeat of 2021. We met with Ms. Gotsky again at the end of October. We know we have at least 2 food trucks. We have s'mores, along with at least 10 businesses that'll participate. The city has confirmed Santa Claus, Santa Howard will be there again. The carolers will have the dining tent there along with the picnic tables. So I actually feel pretty good about the event, which always makes me worry. So I'll knock on wood. But we are going to meet the week of November 28th, one last time before the event on December 3rd. And we've been reminded multiple times to have the amplifier and speakers out there so the mayor doesn't have to scream this year. And hopefully we'll make sure we don't make that mistake again. So thanks for the question.
Thank you. Any other? Teresa, go ahead.
Just follow-up question on that. Will we have interpreters for the carolers?
Yes, ma'am. We're going to have one.
Awesome. Anything else? All right. Oh, Deborah, go ahead, please.
Do we need interpreters for Santa Claus?
Oh, actually, it's for Santa Claus, I think. We do have
For the carolers.
Chris and Stacy, our superintendent Parks and Recreation, and our recreation specialists have been working with the company we use. I thought it was for the carolers, but it may be for Santa. So I'll have to send you an email and explain it. My apologies.
Anything else?
I have one thing. Have a
Please.
very nice Thanksgiving holiday. I don't think we'll see each other before then.
We want happy Thanksgiving, Mr. Vunich, Ms. Ripito, to you two and your department, and thank you for all the wonderful work. Make a motion to adjourn, made by Councilmember Farmer, seconded by Councilmember Flasher. All those in favor, please say aye.
Hi.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Scott, for joining